Hello, everybody, and welcome to our World Today, the Unionist Perspective. Today, we're looking at a couple of topics that we believe have caught our attention over this past few weeks and that we think are good to explore from the Unionist perspective. So I'm going to open up to the team and check in with one of you, which topic you felt was the one that stood out most to you.
Seems like Sage is not here yet, but she brought up the topic of Niger's military coup. It feels like it's the most important topic to talk about this week, specifically because it had such a global impact and because the international scene was so against the coup. And I thought it was surprising how quickly it caught on to in terms of the international response, but apparently it is because there is an alliance between the current president, or like a president that is facing the coup, and the rest of the countries to fight the war on terrorism in the Sahara region. And so that may be why there's so much support from the US and other countries and so much opposition with the coup, and why the current president is not stepping down. But also, like, I feel like the other side of this thing is that basically in the region, like Mali and one other countries also faced military coup after fighting the war on terrorism. And so it feels like a pattern, basically. And I just want to know, spiritually, as Unionists, like, what do we feel is the cause of this coup in this region, like Western Africa, south of the desert? Why is there so much political unrest, and why is there such conflicts right now between like presidents that are fighting basically against terrorism, their army, and inside the country in general?
So something that kind of stands out to me, sorry, Nadia, something that stands out to me is this feeling that there's almost a power grab happening in some form or another. So, and I feel like it's almost an ego struggle for power. It's not that it's in the best interests of the populace of a country or any of those countries. It feels like that a lot of it is related to military leaders who are not comfortable with their power being brought in line under a democratic society. And so you're finding that, like specifically with the Niger coup, it feels like it was a fight against democracy, or a fight against the desire of the majority of the country, because they wouldn't have moved to elect a democratically elected president in 2021, and in 2023 there's this power grab. And it seems like there's a lot of power grabs in a lot of those Western African countries. And also, you know, the fact that once again the Wagner Group has been kind of mentioned in it, even though they may not have had an influence under these circumstances. There seems to be almost, it's literally a power struggle, but more because of ego than anything that's serving the greater good in any of those areas.
I was feeling the same thing, Granville, that it feels like people, like, the truth of what power really isn't being like accepted or acknowledged or known, like, because it's like these power grabs for the purposes of ego instead of what true power is, which we know is actually love and peace. But it's like they're not um, choosing that or going for that. It's for something else.
Yeah, I have to say, like, sorry.
No, it's fine. I just
I have to say, yeah, it feels like looking at this military man that did the coup on national television last week. It feels like there was no purpose for it. There was no like, hey, the president has been doing shit, and we want something that is better for our country. It didn't feel like that at all. It just felt like, hey, we're just taking over and bye-bye. And it's like, what? I don't understand it. And I think that's why, that's also one of the reasons why the international scene, international like geopolitical powers are so against this coup, because this is definitely something that is saying like, all right, like we don't want democracy to fall there. And it goes back to this war that we've seen around choosing democracy or not. And it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. This goes against what was built, like the stability that we had in this region. We don't want this to happen. And so, yeah, so it's kind of surprising, but also, yeah, I'm glad to see that I guess the Western countries and countries that are for democracy really know how to, when and how to step up in order to keep that global stability and that choice, maintain that choice that we're making around democracy.
Yeah, that goes along with what I was saying. It's surprising that this coup is happening because there didn't seem to be a reason, aside from saying that the presidency did not put any orders against the Jamaat, the extremist Islamic groups that have been terrorizing the area. But other than that, I believe both of them have the same purpose, is to keep terrorism away. However, there's a coup happening against the president. So it seems like that's not really the reason why they want to have this coup, because they could work together.
Yeah, and Velaya has already fallen because it was reiterated that he was a key allied piece of a war on terrorism in that region for everyone in the world. So, yeah. Sage.
Also, what?
Yeah. Oh.
What happened 3 years consecutively? Like, not consecutively, but it happened 3 times already within
Right.
short time, like 3 different coups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it might be like, if I feel into it, it feels like a continuation of kind of like an energy of not trusting the central government, for the people overall in Niger, and maybe since colonial times, because like those big centralized governments of states mostly like weren't in place until the colonial powers like France came in. And so I think that continued distrust of government fuels the instability there, maybe in like West Africa, like in the Sahel. And also, so that's why like alliances can like change so much, maybe partly. And also, I feel like it's about the West continuing to learn its lesson, because I know like France and other Western countries have like, they've had a military presence in West Africa for like a while, like trying to combat terrorists, and like in a row, like Burkina Faso, Mali, and now Niger have had like coups or instability. I don't know if Burkina Faso actually had a fall of their government. I don't remember, but I know Mali did. And so you're kind of seeing like the West has had this strategy of kind of like in Afghanistan, you know, the West has had the strategy of being like, let's go into these countries where there are extremist groups and try to like combat them and keep them in check so that it doesn't get out of control. But I feel I almost wonder if like they're trying to assert too much control and even take responsibility for people in those countries, like just like in Afghanistan, where it was a 21-year war. The US and other Western countries propped up the government all that time, and then it rapidly fell. So that's a case of like taking responsibility when the country itself has to decide what it wants. And also, I have a feeling of like, doesn't like the Western countries' presence there and all of the like carnage and collateral damage that comes with military presence there, doesn't it kind of increase anti-Western sentiment, or people can easily be swayed to think that, especially with Russia in the mix, because now like in all three countries, people have been in protests and they've been like holding Russian flags and like carrying around big pictures of Vladimir Putin, saying like, you know, we don't want the West. And they're kind of like, Russia's like been trying to influence Africa since the post-World War II era, or maybe even earlier, right? Saying like, oh, we're against the West, so we're kind of like your friends, you know, now give me all your Reese's. Extremely cynical. So I feel like that's kind of what's going on. Yeah, that's my feelings about it. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I feel I'm not sure. What was on the French side, let's say. First of all, there was like really an incentive to like intervene between like 2013 and 2015, when there were so many attacks in the world. And the fact that the international scene intervened helped in like stabilizing the region and basically the whole wide world on the war against terrorism. But it was in 2015. And then the communication that we had from the military and the media up until last year, I would say, was that everything was basically co-managed with the local armies there, and they benefited as much of the infrastructure of Western countries as anyone else. And basically they took operation, they trained themselves or were trained, lead some of them. It felt like there was a partnership, I would say. And so I don't know how much of this was like just communication, just a veneer, and how much of it was true. But it did feel like the situation was contained, but they were still here for like 6 to 7 years, 8 years now, after the war like ended, because there are still factions that are making instability grow in certain regions of Mali and Niger. And yeah, I just don't know. I feel like we don't have all the elements. I feel like the goal wasn't to do an Afghanistan 2.0 because of a partnership, like a really deep established partnership that there were between the local authorities and the international authorities. But yeah, so I'm not sure it's the same. Maybe it may be part of the thing. Another layer that I feel is that I remember when we talked about Senegal, and Senegal was like the most stable country of the region for like 25 years, you know. And then suddenly the president turned, didn't like the opposition, the guy that was going to get to power. Maybe the guy also, he didn't like the Western countries, so he wanted more independence, more growth in Senegal, for Senegal, things like that. But then the democracy turned into something authoritarian, and the guy disappeared or was killed, and like protests broke, and now Senegal is in a really dire situation. And I just don't know. I feel like there's also this part of this question, a spiritual question asked in the region of all countries of like, do you really choose democracy? Do you choose to surrender control and surrender how it looks and go all in, or do you want to do it your way? Do something else? Do you not want democracy? Like, what do you want, basically? And I feel like it's a test because a lot of people want to continue democracy, but with Western countries out of the way, right? They say like, we're not of the same world, you hurt us too much, we don't want you anywhere near us. Whether there was like really still exploitation going on, or whether it was just like a presence and a partnership and companionship. And that's really the big deal with Africa and the big pattern to heal. And Jeff talked about it once, and it's really like feeling like you're in the world and like surrendering control in how democracy and how your good and expectation is going to come to you. And sometimes it's not like revolution and destroying everything that was done and starting over. Sometimes it's like weird partnership, you know, having someone that you don't like as your coworker, but learning from them and growing and realizing, maybe this isn't so bad, and maybe there's something for me to learn here. And so I feel like there's mostly that resistance to really going all in and taking that place, Africa taking its place in the world and saying like, no, we don't want because we were hurt too much before, but like you're like an integral part of the world right now. So it's time to maybe let go of what you thought was right, what you thought was wrong, and see where a partnership with other countries can really, really take you, you know, and not just third world questionable leaders, but everyone really, and really going all in, because it feels like there was a semblance of stability and then everything goes to shit. And so for me, it talks about like not really fully accepting what was given there. And it's not to say I'm not like supporting neo-colonialism, but it feels like there was really something there that wasn't neo-colonialism. It was really like a partnership, and the way the US is talking about the president of Niger right now feels like it was really like there was a discussion from equal to equal. It was like a really important ally, you know. It didn't feel to me like it was something about exploitation. It was just relationships. So yeah, I think like there's maybe something to really go deep into about acceptance, self-acceptance and acceptance of others.
So I think you and Sage touched on something quite important, and the one thing I feel like is probably still a core wound is the past and the colonialist overlords that they suffered because of. So there's a piece of hanging on to the past and by association, resisting change. And then there's the piece about not wanting to learn, so believing that we can do it by ourselves, which is probably quite disastrous when you are emerging from one type of rule into another type of rule that hasn't been there before, that is going to require a certain level of maturity to build the partnership and the relationship and understand that other countries, other nations have learned certain hard-won lessons that you don't have to repeat in order to benefit and progress. And I think it just goes back to that concept of nations being complex individuals. And part of the challenge is that sometimes individuals choose not to learn from well-learned lessons by other people. And we also understand that you don't necessarily have to learn through contrast. So it's this choice of rather learning through love than learning through contrast that's not completely being cemented. So it's probably an opportunity for that choice to be made more consciously as a collective in those spaces. But then there's also the other concept of, yes, some people have learned these lessons and we don't need to learn through this contrast, but we also learn through our mistakes. And we hope that our mistakes are not so unfortunate that they create dire situations, but we also have to be compassionate that they are in a learning cycle and that there are going to be certain mistakes being made that on the outside look like it's a choice of insanity, but you don't tell a toddler they're insane when they touch a fire for the first time. They are learning, so there's a level of compassion that needs to come into play, but then there's also a level of truly healing the relationship wound of the past so that they are open to the message of doing things in a different way.
Yeah, I think you tied it all up. That's pretty good. It feels like maybe a good time for a transition. Nadia, did you want to say something?
I was also feeling a sense of big victim mentality, because thinking that if they partner with outsiders, there might be a repeat of history. And to think that they would allow that again or lose their power, that would happen again, is causing them a trust issue, which is causing them to either support the coup or not know what to decide on, depending on their democracy. So I was feeling that victim mentality and powerlessness.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Speaking of victim mentality and powerlessness, we wanted to kind of going and talk about Spain a little bit more for a short while. And I think it's different, but there's something about the mistrust. We've talked about that last week, right? The mistrust of around the media and the traditional parties that is pushing people to make different choices. One things that are different in the case of Spain, it's independence of Catalonia, and also far right politicians coming up to the forefront And even though the far-right party didn't do as well as it was predicted, they still have to build a coalition right now. And they're still at the head of the parliament. And so I wondered, like, what does it talk to, seeing as we talked about like media and them transforming stories and polarization last week, I just wanted to get your feeling of like, what does it really talk to, speak to the situation in Spain?
Yeah, I guess the feeling is like that maybe people have felt more like isolated by government policies, and that there's less of a sense of trust in like the major political parties, like in Spain and kind of around the world, because of just lots of different factors, maybe especially like after the pandemic and everything. It was just a really difficult time and challenging for like mainstream parties to kind of help people feel good about what was going on, because like they had to make a lot of decisions that were unpopular, you know, such as like closing down for COVID and everything, like doing all kinds of restrictions. I feel like that would naturally lead to like people searching for like more extremist parties who are outside of the mainstream. But like, it's interesting because the media, I mean, there were lots of stories about like that basically that were like feeding into fear of Spain's far right, the Vox party, gaining a lot more seats, because like there were a lot of local elections in Spain, or there were elections in Spain, and the liberal left center party like lost. And so the prime minister called snap elections basically to, yeah, try to like to create more of a rally for his party basically. And so people were kind of afraid that the far right Vox party would like take a lot more seats, because like their rhetoric about like traditional family values and like basically like opposing immigration and LGBT rights and all this stuff was kind of like seen as potentially appealing to people. But that's not what happened. And like the kind of center right, like more like traditional right-wing party, but not the far right, actually ended up taking a good amount of seats from the Vox party. So it didn't seem like that what the media was like getting all anxious about, you know, that didn't happen at all. So I felt like that was interesting. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what that all means for Spain or anything, but my feeling of it was like, so both parties claimed victory of the election, like the conservative and the liberal main parties, they both claimed like this was basically a victory for us. I didn't feel like both of them feel like they have some sort of like weakness, and I don't know what that is, but it seems like there's something going on that isn't apparent or that I'm not seeing with it. Yeah, that's it.
When you talk
Isaiah, Sage, you might have.
Yeah, I'm hearing an echo. We're hearing an echo when we talk, and you're unmuted. I think the piece you were right, but I think the piece you were maybe missing was like the fear of a new Franco era, a new Francoism era. That was what the article was showing. And basically, it's been almost 50 years since Franco died. And people really wanted not to go back to that era and period. And I think that's what the far right is representing for them, because it was such a traumatizing period of time for them. It was like from between the wars to like a very like a pretty recent time they experienced that. And the problem with COVID is that a lot of people were at home. There were a lot of restrictions, and Spain has been hit very hard, and economically too, they've been hit very hard. And so I feel like the traditional parties announced a victory because for them it was a campaign led by fear that we were going to have neo-Francoism. So that's why they announced a victory. But it's kind of like, it's based on fear, so obviously like it would explain why you don't feel good about it. And there is also like this weakness of maybe like, oh, we failed people. It's been 50 years and people don't feel like there's something different. We're not doing that good and things like that. It's kind of like, there's this meh feeling. So I think that was maybe what you weren't seeing, because like if you're not Spanish, probably you don't feel that pregnant fear of having like a new Franco coming in.
So something that's kind of almost paralleling all these stories is there seems to be, and I think it's the fallout of life returning to normal, that the dregs of the destabilization are still taking hold. So remember, out of COVID, there's been a lot of desire to move to stability. And unfortunately, sometimes that stability comes comes as the picture of what was. And because they know what was, they might partially be trying to revert to certain things as opposed to considering that the progression and stabilization is going to come from shifting towards a new way. Because COVID, unfortunately, brought in a whole lot of uncomfortable new. Nobody knew what they were getting into, and their lives were in complete upheaval for a long time. And it was a long time globally. And now we're starting to see Spain kind of straddling the new versus the old. We see Africa with all these military coups almost straddling the new versus the old. And, you know, it kind of thematically you see that, but they're doing it for different reasons. Some are doing it not to let go of the past. Some are doing it potentially because the past prior to COVID actually felt safe. And unfortunately, there is potential Stockholm syndrome in knowing the safety of the past discomfort versus this last 4 years of COVID discomfort. So you could be having a very almost inadvertent psychological thing happening with all these political shifts and people not quite knowing, who should I choose? Who should I vote for? What am I going to get? Am I going to get more of the same instability? Is it going to upend my life for a longer period of time? They have all of that trauma of COVID. They have struggling economies that are battling to recover, which means that they personally, from a household finance point of view, are battling to recover. So there might just be this little bit of a dig in of the heels towards something that felt like proper stability in the past, but it didn't really benefit them, to something that was major instability and people are still reeling from.
Yeah, pretty much. I think we see that a lot when we talk about politics. Obviously, because we fear people want to revert to things that they know and feel are safe. And I think we all experience that as individuals. So it's not really that much of a surprise that we experience that as countries as well. So yeah, it's pretty much sums it up. Yeah, it feels like we had another big topic to talk about, and it was like the UFO hearing that is happening at this time in Congress.
So guys, I just want to say, what the hell? Like, do they have nothing else to do?
Okay, yeah. I just said we. Yeah, French. I'm losing my English. Can someone explain why the hearing was such an urgent matter? Maybe I guess like US authorities have always been very tense around alien stories, and I don't know why. Especially because like it feels like on the internet people like don't really care. And like it's cool, but what? Why? Can someone explain?
That's why I brought up the Sam Bankman-Fried story, because his charges were actually dropped, I believe, the same day that they were having the UFO hearing. So it's kind of like a little bit under the radar. So I was like, because I was also wondering, why are they having such an intense meeting about this? But of course, they did go very thoroughly of what the military leaders saw in terms of UFO or unidentified vehicles and non-human beings. But in the sense of what we know and what I know with what Jeff and Shaleia had shared, it's kind of like not a big deal given that they are higher intelligence. And of course, God had created a lot of creation, a lot of creators. And yeah, that's how I feel about it. It's not really a big deal, but for them, it seemed like a very big deal. I heard at least an hour or 2 hours of the hearing. And what some of them were saying was they experienced some disturbing scenes. And yeah, apparently the non-humans were maybe violence was given against them. It was kind of unclear, but aside from that, they were just describing the physics and the ability of this vehicle not being from us or any other country in this world. So that was very daunting for them and could be a potential threat, which we know is not a potential threat, because if they were to attack on us, they would have already, but they haven't. They're intelligent beings that are actually here to help us. And yeah.
So there's for me, there's kind of the sense of what is our attention being diverted from? Like, I feel like, when something becomes so sensational, what is actually happening that we shouldn't be paying attention to? Because let's be honest, this UFO thing is not new. Some of us might believe more that it's science fiction than anything else. And whether or not it is true or not, is this really the biggest thing that is bugging the United States right now? Like, let's ask that question.
No, it's not. I mean, it's kind of, it feels like, you know, UFOs it's one of those many topics that can kind of be trotted out. Like whenever morale gets really low or something comes up that the public might be really upset about, you can trot it out and be like, hey, you guys, look at that shiny thing in the sky, you know, UFOs, man, you know. And with what Nadia mentioned too, I feel like it's no coincidence, at least on a spiritual level. I'm not saying it was necessarily intentional, but it could be. On a spiritual level, though, it's no coincidence that those hearings began on the same day that I think, right, some of the charges were dropped with Sam Bankman-Fried, because I'm sure a lot of the public, what do you say, Granville? You were muted. I wanted to hear.
One of the charges, and I think that's also the thing that's bugging me, is that one of the charges are dropped, and now there's a sensationalist story that all of the charges have been dropped.
Right, there's some confusion, and of course the media wants to maximize the attention they receive and the money and the clicks by stoking people's anger about like corrupt, you know, billionaires, and about the whole what is that stuff called, cryptocurrency scam that so many people even still now buy into, but people have lost a lot of money from that, you know, so they're just going to be mad about it. It's just, there's a lot going on here that's very, it's a lot of like obscuring things and just playing to people's intense emotions there, where it's that's all I feel.
I feel like whoever is trying to do this into like a sensational story to tell doesn't necessarily have TikTok. Because, and I'm explaining, because everyone on TikTok is like, we don't care. And I just heard right before our live a reporter saying something like, they deliberately didn't tell us about this information for decades and they hid the body. And I was like, man, have you not seen any sensational pseudo documentaries around UFOs? And we obviously know that NASA and the government are not saying everything that they've been discovering. Even in science, we're not saying everything that they've discovered. So like, we really don't care. And the reporter was so shocked. So like, I was like, my God, am I missing something? And to be fair, I don't know if it's because I live in France or something like that, but Bankman-Fried, the story, maybe because we've had our own crap to deal with in France this week, but the story of Bankman-Fried, it completely went above my head. And I think in that sense, the media was successful because I didn't hear a thing about it until like you, my American friends, said something about it. And I was like, oh, this is happening. So now that we're more clear around the fact that, you know, UFOs, cool, but it's not like the most important thing is not going to, I think people are more spiritual in that sense. Like they're saying like, hey, this doesn't, it's just like, we're just getting high on that information. It doesn't bring anything new to us. And I'm pretty proud of humanity for really being spiritually grounded enough to recognize that. Now that it's done, I really would like an explanation of actually what happened in the Bankman-Fried story, especially because I think I'm not the only one that is not aware or maybe confused, and that we don't have all the facts straight. So anyone that wants to explain will be very welcome.
So basically, it's Bankman had gone through a scam by taking a lot of people's money and using it for risky reasons and risky investments. And he didn't correctly show his finances and his assets when he went into bankruptcy. So he had a very rapid increase when he started his Bitcoin, which was FX or something. And it was going really well. And he went into a tussle with Binance, which is another major Bitcoin. Yeah. And so Binance was kind of like, oh, they're not doing so well, let me buy them. And then Bankman's FX was like, no, we're doing fine. But within a day or two in November, it completely dropped because of Binance like showing that FX wasn't doing so well. And because it completely dropped, he went into bankruptcy. And going into bankruptcy, he didn't honestly disclose what his assets were. And instead, he disclosed assets of his investors so that he could get, money back, more money back than what he was actually worth. And so now it's into this whole case of like, why did you lie? Why you were claiming fraud? And there was something else I wanted to mention. Just basically a lot of fraud when it came to other people's money and misusing that money, and now losing millions up to billions of dollars of investors' money and putting it into the Bahamas. Yeah, so still updates on the story coming, but yeah, one of the cases were dropped, not all of them. And people are saying that it hasn't been under a lot of enforcement because he gave so many donations to both the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party. So now there's like people that are allied with him that are helping him with this case when it really shouldn't be the case. And he really did scam a lot of people.
And what was the extradition part?
Go ahead. Oh, I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Oh, he was extradited to the US by the Bahamas. Yeah, because he was like in the Bahamas at the time that he was being like charged, basically. And from what I've read, it hasn't been super clear, but when the Bahamas extradited him, they said, yes, Sam Bankman-Fried is being extradited to the US by us for all of these charges. And they did not include the campaign finance crimes in those charges. So apparently, like, the US can't pursue those charges because of the agreement they have with the Bahamas. So if the Bahamas says like they were extraditing them for these reasons, but not this reason, the US can't prosecute him for that reason. But I think that's what Nadia was referring to, is his like campaign finance contributions to both parties. And the fact that they're not going to pursue charges about that, it probably like stokes public anger maybe and upset, because they're like, oh, well, like they're not going after him for that. And because he's basically like putting money in both parties' pockets, they're trying to like protect him and all of that stuff. But it was more like Well, but the question would be, why did the Bahamas in the first place not list that as one of the charges that they're extraditing him for? Right? That does seem fishy, but yeah, they didn't drop all the charges though. Yeah.
I don't think they have even a leg now, because now he's in house arrest in California. So they could charge him if they wanted to and go forward with it. But I'm not sure. New updates will have to be updated.
It seems confusing, but since it was the one thing that the media was focusing on the most, and the one thing that people knew about the most, maybe, that's why it's stoking people's anger right now, because it's like, oh, well then he's a criminal free to go wherever, and the whole case is dropped, which is not the case, because he is facing a whole lot of criminal charges still. But I agree that the story around like the campaign finances is unclear, I would say. But who knows, maybe someone somewhere was like taking pity on like US politics, because I feel like people don't really want a political scandal of that scale constantly in their mind for the next year of campaign at this time. At least that's my feeling. I feel like it would tire people out more than do good. So maybe in some sense, not unintentionally again, that's why they're more focusing on Bitcoin, which is for me like the most important part anyway, to like really discover the truth about cryptocurrencies and how it needs to be regulated, and how people should really like get their money into it, like how investors should be protected or not. So yeah, but that's my feeling on it. Maybe that's not the feeling of everyone, and that may be why there's so much anger about it.
So I think you touched on something quite important in terms of cryptocurrency and how it's regulated and what needs to happen. And I think that's, for me, the thing that was being deflected from. Because, as you also pointed out, I only heard about this story because of the team sharing those articles. But I would imagine that cryptocurrency as a form of trade exchange in a global economy would actually be quite important to note, one. But then two, you also probably have, as you said, the scandal thing around how much of this has been deflected because people are beholden to him because of his campaign contributions. Because he's on a level bought loyalty at the expense of being fully prosecuted for cryptocurrency fraud, which is quite significant because cryptocurrency at some point, the way it's traded, forms a banking system on its own. And it's a banking system that's in competition with the exchange of physical money and the use of certain types of banking instruments and banking accounts, and that exchange of value through the general banking system is what cryptocurrency is almost directly in competition with. So it almost to show that there could be cryptocurrency fraud almost starts to make you wonder what actually really needs to happen from a legislative point of view, from a monitoring value point of view, and also, let's be honest, the kind of investment growth that cryptocurrency has seen. You kind of now there's going to be the question of how did they achieve it, which requires a lot more investigation than what would have happened if there wasn't so much, if there wasn't a bigger focus on it. So the bigger the focus, the more there's going to be noise, the more there's going to be an investigation required, the more it will probably lead to some forms of regulation and some regulatory bodies, whether they are now only nation specific or if they actually sit at a more almost global banking level. There's going to be a lot more work to be done in that space.
Yeah, I agree. And I always have a sense that in general, when the Bahamas go into some type of scandal, usually what they do is really be honest about confronting other countries and saying like, hey, take care of this crap. And so again, spiritually, like having a cryptocurrency that is affecting their citizens and citizens of other countries, and having to have done that in order to extradite him, really speaks to me about like the Bahamas saying like, hey, we want no more of this shit, like take care of it. And for them, like maybe cryptocurrencies was more important than campaign, and maybe like it feels like nonsense for people, but I would say this is pretty smart. So yeah, shout out to the Bahamas for that, definitely. Nadia, do you want to say something else?
Yeah, I think it's great that this is coming into light. And I saw an interview with Mark Cuban, and I forget his name. He did the Tonight Show, saying that this isn't any different from what Wall Street is doing. It's just that Wall Street is hiding it a lot more than what is coming out of cryptocurrency. So it's surprising that this is happening so quickly because, you know, cryptocurrency is so new, but I'm glad that it's coming into light so that other financial scams can also come into light. And I don't know if we have time, but to transition into more clarity. Oh, no more time? Okay. It's going to bring in the seaweed story, but guess not.
So like we literally have 2 minutes. So I think it wouldn't do justice to the story to even start to talk about it. I don't know how everybody else feels.
No, you're right. 2 minutes would not do justice.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it's super important, so maybe we can talk about it next week. That's what my feeling was. But yeah, as Unionists, we know that the financial system isn't perfect, far from it, and that there are a lot of like bubbles in the speculative markets that needs to be looked at. And so maybe it surprises people, but it also feels like spiritually guided that the justice is now taking a look at them, and good for them, I would say, and good for us too.
And I do think it's important because the cryptocurrency bubble has been growing and growing and growing. And it kind of does need to be popped just a little bit, because I don't believe that it does anything. There's no comparative from a normal banking point of view to a crypto banking point of view, except that his cryptocurrency dropped so quickly, it could have been likened to the run on a bank. But still, I mean, you know, there has to be a level of regulation so that value, people's money is actually protected. So I think it's a good thing that it's surfacing. Okay, so having said that, guys, thank you for the conversation today. We have reached our hour. Thank you to everybody that's followed us. Please also feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel. And we will look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.